Alright, I know that I'm late to the party here, but I'll go ahead and admit that the title's kind of clickbait. It's amazing that so many people went into battle over this show. She-Hulk has provided some of the dumbest hot takes I've ever seen on Twitter, and now I have to be the party pooper here who comes in with the cold water and say something you might not like. She-Hulk is just fine the way it is. This show isn't insultingly bad, but it's not an entirely good show. I had a lot of people expect me to hate this show, but if you hate a show, it doesn't immediately make it a bad show. What I mean by that is like your personal preferences don't contribute to if a show is good or bad. That's just a reason you don't like the show. It doesn't mean that the quality of the show is bad, even though there are things in this show, quality-wise, that are just terrible. But that stuff is only brought up in arguments that I've seen like once, and then the rest of it is just like some weird incel shit. I'm gonna try not to spoil the show here, but also I don't care because clips have been littered all over the internet already, so it really doesn't matter. For starters, I want to reiterate that an event happening in a show isn't a sole reason for a show being objectively good or bad. To be honest, a lot of the stuff I've seen is perfectly fine. It's just the internet laughing at like edits and shit. But some of y'all just like get offended by like the silly post-credit shit or goofy scenes that happen in the show. Daredevil doing a post-warning walk of shame doesn't make the whole show bad. She-Hulk and Meg the Stallion twerking in their office and doing like fucking dances in there doesn't make the show terrible. Those are not reasons that a show is terrible. Those are just reasons you hate the show. The CGI being really bad, like video game character bad, like that's a legitimate reason to critique a show. But I have to admit, it does get better at the end, but it still doesn't look good. I honestly feel really bad for these CGI effects artists that have to keep producing Marvel stuff because they're just so tired and they need a vacation or time off or something, and it's just reflecting in all of the Marvel properties now, and they all just look worse as they keep making them. Another thing with the show is the writing and the jokes, and I'm gonna go ahead and start by saying that comedy is completely subjective, and I understand that She-Hulk is supposed to be a sitcom. That being said, I unfortunately just didn't laugh at most of the jokes. Like, to me, most of them didn't land, and I understand that other people thought that the jokes were funny, and that's fine, but for me, I just didn't. And like, I think the most I did was like laugh a few times during the group therapy episode, but I mean, that's about it for me. And as far as the writing, it is not completely bad here. They do a pretty good job at fleshing out Jennifer Walters as a character, and that's totally fine. My only issue is that it was kind of too slow. Like, I think I got bored during the show at times. On top of that, a lot of the characters that were introduced in this show kind of made the same kind of jokes a little bit. Like, some of them were a little different from others, but most of them kind of had the same format of jokes, and I mean, it just got old after a while, and it felt like the show wasn't giving me anything new. That's my biggest complaint. On the topic of humor and recycling, I want to take a moment to mention that we're about to end Phase 4 of the MCU, and most of Phase 4 is all been comedy action movies relying heavily on the comedy aspect, which at this point I think was just overdone way too much and resulted in audiences feeling like they're just getting the same crap over and over and over again. Like, I understand that Disney was testing the waters with these Marvel shows and playing it safe, but there is such a thing as overly cautious. I'm almost worried about the next big crossover event being as bad as something like Age of Ultron, because these shows have just made it a staple that the most superhero movies gotta make room for goofs and giggles in sacrifice of quality. The next Avengers crossover would be a huge disappointment if it was just full of jokes that sort of annoyed the audience after a while. And I want y'all to remember that this phase of the MCU started with the death and resurrection of half the universe. There were some good things about this phase, like I really enjoyed Werewolf by Night, but I've already heard others not counting it because it's a short film, which is a very stupid reason not to count it. My point here is that if you've been following this channel, you kind of get the idea that I sort of think that all of the Marvel properties are kind of the same, and they're all underwhelming, except for some that are either really good or really terrible. And in the case of She-Hulk, I'm at a little bit of a crossroads here because I, on paper, can see that this is not a bad show and it actually tried something. I can at least say that She-Hulk is not like all of the other Marvel properties. And if you were to compare this show to any of the She-Hulk comics, you might find that this is actually a very faithful adaptation of her character done pretty well. Those aren't high stakes stories, and it's very clear that this show was never supposed to be high stakes. That's fine, and I don't mind that. And say whatever you want about this show, but Jen has a full character arc. It's not something that's going to keep you tuning in every single week with anticipation, but it feels genuine. I actually kind of like She-Hulk as a character, and the actress portraying her, Tatiana, is really good at showing emotion in scenes. My only gripe with that is that whenever she was in Hulk form, you really couldn't see that because the CGI really was that bad, and it was really stiff and fell flat, and took away some of the impact from some of those scenes. The one actual bone to pick with Jennifer Walters as a character is how badly she puts down Bruce Banner. She has the actual audacity to belittle him when he is just trying to make sure that she stays safe with her new powers that she might find hard to control at times. He never said anything like her problems didn't matter, he just said that her lawyer occupation just needed to be on hold for a second. And then she got into this weird pissing competition between who had the most on their plate. You know, the one guy in the MCU who has a serious amount of trauma, has lost the love of his life, and has even had the only canon suicide attempt in the MCU. I'm about to spoil one thing, so if that really bothers you and you don't want anything spoiled, just skip 30 seconds ahead. It's not even that big of a spoiler, but I did like the show ending with a sort of commentary on all the clone MCU shows, and She-Hulk going to the studio and calling Kevin a lifeless robot, or whatever she said at the very end. And I just thought it was a little cute. Overall, I think that She-Hulk as a show is just okay. Personally, not entirely for me, but that's perfectly fine as well. If you didn't like the show, just make sure you have legitimate reasons and a perfectly well thought out argument before making your case. I'm pretty much done with this show. I'll never revisit it, I'll never look at any of y'all's dog shit takes ever again, and the rest of us will just be able to continue our lives seeing the show as mediocre at worst and mediocre at best. Putting She-Hulk into my newly simplified rating scale, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and give this a 5 out of 10, 4 out of 10. I'm perfectly fine with a 5, and I just really don't care to change it.